Welcome, everybody. This is Avoiding the Addiction Affliction, and I'm Mike McGowan. This is brought to you by Westwards Consulting, the Kenosha County Substance Use Disorder Coalition, and by a grant from the state of Wisconsin's Dose of Reality Real Talks, reminding you that opioids are powerful drugs and one pill can kill. Fetal alcohol syndrome spectrum disorder, or FASD, affects about 1 in 20 people. It's particularly prevalent among the young people in the adoption and fostering system. It's a hidden brain injury, and FASD can manifest in ways that often lead to challenging behaviors, which can feel overwhelming for caregivers relying on traditional parenting strategies. Make it even more difficult is knowing where to get accurate diagnosis and help. We're going to talk about all that today with Barb Clark, the founder and CEO of FASD Mosaic, where she provides coaching, training, and consulting on fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, trauma, neurodivergence, and challenging behaviors. Barb is the author of a fabulous book. Let me raise it up here, even though you have it behind you, Barb. Raising Kids and Teens with FASD, Advice and Strategies to Help Your Family to Thrive. And she also serves as the head coach for the International FASD Caregiver Kickstart Program. Welcome, Barb.
Thanks, Mike. I'm happy to be here.
I'm so glad you could be with us. I think when we hear this, I'm sure people get confused all the time. When they hear fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, do people automatically hear fetal alcohol syndrome?
Yes, that's the assumption that everybody makes when they hear that word.
And do I have this right that fetal alcohol syndrome is a subset of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder? Is that an accurate way to put it?
Yes, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, FASD, is not a diagnosis. It's an umbrella. In many ways, it's like similar to dementia. Dementia is that there's a big umbrella of various diagnoses that you can have that are dementia, but it's the same with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And fetal alcohol syndrome is the one most people have heard of because it was the first one discovered, but it's the more rare one that's on the spectrum.
Talk about some of the other aspects under the umbrella.
We've got fetal alcohol syndrome. The individuals that have that diagnosis, there's three facial features that they have, and then growth deficits below the 10th percentile, and then they also have to match the cognitive profile. Then there's partial fetal alcohol syndrome. Those individuals only have two of the three facial features. It's just partial facial features, is what that means. And then there's the more hidden one, which is called alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder, ARND. And so those individuals do not have any of the physical features or the facial features, but they did receive the brain injury and match some of the cognitive areas that they're looking at. They're looking at attention, sensory, cognition, lots of different things like that is what they know can be impacted by that alcohol exposure. There's another diagnosis that also we're seeing being used from the DSM-5, the manual that mental health professionals use for diagnosing. Those other three are in the medical journal, the ICD manual. But in the DSM-5, there's one called neurodevelopmental disorder associated with prenatal alcohol exposure. And so that basically is similar to ARND. It's where the individuals don't have the physical features.
You discuss in your great book the struggles that you had with your daughter. Oh, I should have asked you this before we started. Let me
Mhm.
let me try it. Akia?
Okay. Aquila.
Aquila. I was gonna
Yes.
I put the other, very beautiful name. Figuring out what was going on, right?
Yeah, it was quite the journey to her diagnosis because we've had her since she was 5 weeks of age. And she had really typical development overall, but had some really kind of quirky behaviors even as a toddler. We had professionals telling us she was probably just ADHD and to get the Spirited Child book or things like that, which were completely useless. And so, yeah, we had the first 6 years, we really could not figure out what was going on. It didn't make sense. She wasn't learning from consequences. She kept doing the same things over and over, really high energy, lots of just quirky things going on. And finally, when she was 6, that was when we figured out, I was the one that kind of figured out what was going on by searching on the internet.
Okay, that's what I really wanted to dive a little bit into. I had someone yesterday, we were talking about this, say that it seems like the only people who know about FASD are those who have it or have a kid that has it, right? So,
Yeah.
uh, how did you search it out? How did you figure it out? And then what did you do with it
Yeah.
when you thought, oh, this could be it?
Yeah, for me, it was she kept having issues with stealing, and all of the traditional strategies were not phasing it. And it was just really mind-boggling because she's very bright, and so it didn't make sense that that none of the consequences or things were working. And after my husband and I talk about this a lot, how when we keep trying to parent these kiddos with traditional strategies, it can often end up being where we, as the caregivers, as the parents, are now creating a kind of toxic, traumatic environment. We actually threw away our daughter's blanket trying to teach her to stop stealing, and that didn't work. And we had tried everything, positive behavioral interventions, social stories, tons of consequences, every version of a sticker chart there is, and nothing was working. And in our community, we kind of hate sticker charts. It makes
Yes.
vomit come up in our throat when we hear that term, but because it doesn't work effect very long term in particular with our kiddos. But anyways, that was what after we threw her blankie away and she was still stealing, we were like, what is going on? And I started Googling phrases around kids stealing, childhood theft, and I came to a website on fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. And as I'm reading all of the common symptoms, I'm like, oh, this is what we're dealing with. We had documentation of prenatal exposure for her in her case file. We just didn't think she didn't have that face, and she was very bright. And I thought that you had IQs below 70 if you had fetal alcohol.
Yeah, not every parent has that biological information who adopts a child, right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's not always documented. That's one of the things that organizations like FASD United and Proof Alliance and other orgs are really trying to work hard to get this screening and to get more awareness and knowledge of this out there. I feel like we're finally starting to make some headway in that area, but it's been a huge battle that we've been having for many years.
I want to go backwards just a second because I love the part in your book where you talk about the thought process for stealing. Can you
Yeah.
can you go through it? I think it's really illustrative and why stickers don't work.
Yeah, we talk about when we finally started to understand the stealing, it really, some of our kiddos with FASD don't understand the abstract concept of ownership. You think of toddlers, and toddlers don't truly get ownership. They think everything is mine, mine. And but a lot of our kiddos eventually do understand ownership, but don't have that impulse control to not take something when they really want it. And so when we finally started to understand, and this still was not right when she turned 6 and was diagnosed. At age 6, she was diagnosed over 20 years ago. It still took us years and years and really our own blood, sweat, and tears to figure out how to parent her differently. And most of that was through our own mistakes and screw ups, to be honest. So when we finally realized, okay, obviously we're clearly, it took us forever, right? We're not going to punish this out of her. That is not going to work. And so what we started doing was we started telling her, when you feel that impulse to take something that isn't yours, tell the closest adult. And we had everybody in her school, in our neighborhood, we had talked to everybody about this. And we were like, so when she tells you, don't shame her. Say, I'm so proud of you for telling me. Let's go find somebody to help. Let's bring you home to mom, or let's go to the office and school and find somebody to help you process this. So what we started doing was when she would steal, I would ask her questions. I would say, when you first saw that item, how did you feel right away? And she would say, oh, I got so excited. And then I would say, what happened next? And she goes, I grabbed it. And then I would ask her, how did you feel when you were first holding that item? And she'd talk about how good it felt. And then I would ask her a few questions about how you think the person she took it from felt, or that kind of stuff. And then I would ask her, how do you feel now about having taken it? And she would say, not good. She would say, because that's stealing. Now, for years, when we were using traditional punitive strategies, we would ask her those questions also. And her answers always were, I don't know. I don't want to talk
Hmm.
about it. I don't know. And now that we kind of moved away from punitive, shame-based strategies and punishing, grounding, taking things away, we had finally stopped that. That allowed her not to get so anxious in these moments. Because what happens is, in these moments when any kid's in trouble, they get anxious. Their brain and body goes on fire. And when you're anxious, your brain isn't functioning great. And so now that we had removed that shame and that fear of being punished or losing something, her anxiety didn't spike. And she was able to actually answer these questions, which we had been asking her for years. And then I would ask her, what should you have done when you felt that impulse to take that thing? And then she'd say, there's the story that's in my book was when she stole our school superintendent's cell phone, and which was a true story. And anyways, I said, why didn't you, what should you have done? And she said, I was supposed to tell the closest adult. And I said, why didn't you? And she just looks at me like I'm a ding dong. And she goes, I told you there weren't any there. Because when she took it, there was nobody in the office.
Oh,
And that's
wow.
the concrete
Yeah.
brain, somebody with FASD who's not great at solving problems and thinking out of the box.
Sure. It was sitting on the counter, right?
Yeah, for us, when we backed away from punishing and shaming her, it took a year and a half of all of those kind of conversations, and she stopped stealing, and she's 26 now. And she does give me permission, everybody, to share any stories I
Hmm.
share about
Hmm.
her, but she hasn't stolen for way over a decade now.
And I want people to understand this. It's a brain disorder. One paragraph in
Mhm.
your book is like, "Ooh, that's pretty. I want it. It's mine.
Yeah,
That feels good. It's mine now." And
yeah.
that's what happens. Okay.
Mhm.
You had to have worked closely and found receptive people, Barb. People who listen to this and watch this podcast know that I'm in schools all the time.
Yeah.
I hear autism,
Mhm.
I hear Asperger's, I never hear FASD. And
Mhm.
I'm picturing a kid in a school stealing something.
Yes.
And boy, what you just described is not going to happen in most of them, as much as I love those people.
Yeah. Oh, no. And this is the thing too. I have to talk with families that I'm working with. I work in that group coaching program, FASD Success, and we have to talk about this all the time. Our families across the world, I work with families in other countries, are all struggling with the school systems. And it's not because nobody goes into education who doesn't like kids and want to
Correct.
do what's right for kids. I have to say that all the time, but they just don't have the right information because they're not being trained on this. And I train schools pretty frequently, and I can't tell you how many times I've literally had some of these educators in tears feeling guilty for the things that they've said to kids. One time, a caregiver actually paid for me to train their school, and they came to the training, and two teachers went up to her crying and hugging and apologizing afterwards. Schools do better when they know better. We all do better. When I was a horrible parent for my daughter when I kept trying to use traditional strategies, and we've apologized for that for all of our kids actually. But it's the same thing with educators. They're not going to do well when they don't have the right knowledge. And so, if one of the most effective things that our families can do is to work to build a strong relationship with that school and to try to encourage the right training and stuff like that for families, what or for the staff. What I often do, I go to IEP meetings with families sometimes, and a lot of times the schools are like, "Oh gosh, here this is going to be a
Right.
ball buster coming in." They're like, "Oh no," they don't always react to it. Then they sit up more straight often when there's just some random person that they bring in. And I don't come in there butting heads or anything like that. I ask questions, I bring up ideas, but I drop little nuggets of education throughout it. And a lot of times by the end of it, they're like, "Oh, could you come and do a training for
Right.
us?"
As a parent, you didn't make this stuff up. I mean, as bright as you are, a lot of the advice you got was from pediatricians, from doctors, from
Yes.
therapists. And when
Yes.
that doesn't work, that's
Yes.
got to make a parent feel terrible.
Oh, it's absolutely awful. And I was just leading a coaching call yesterday, and we have a family that's got in the state here in the US who's has a new professional they're working with. And the we've been coaching this family now for a couple of months on how to use these different type of strategies. And this professional is shaming her, being like, it sounds like you might be doing too many accommodations. And how is your child going to learn how to function? This, I'm talking about a 9-year-old, right? And this parent, this professional is sitting and telling this caregiver, how are they going to be able to be in a relationship ever someday? And I was like really gently trying to say, this might not be the right professional for you. And I'm like, please, professional, do not undo all of this great work we've been doing for 2 months with this family to care for this child the right way. And so we do have families, including myself, who run into those professionals again, who are well intentioned, who read the books, went through the trainings, and this is what they're being fed when they're in their university programs or other things. And that's what's unfortunate. And I'm not saying some of those therapies and interventions can work great for with a neurotypical brain who's having issues. So again, what I was encouraging that parent to do was if you really do have to continue working with this professional, first of all, see if they'd read my book, but also see if they'd be open to getting some more specific training on FASD.
Okay, so under the umbrella or under an umbrella are things like autism, ADHD,
Hmm.
Asperger's, and we've seen a huge, some people would say too much of a rise in
Yeah,
the diagnosis of these.
yeah.
Where do you go to get a diagnosis? Who does it? And because
Yeah.
it's lacking clearly.
Yeah. Oh, there's a huge issue with diagnostics and not enough people that are trained specifically to diagnose in this. What I recommend people do is go to the FASDunited.org website. And they do phenomenal work, by the way. They have family navigators. I think they have at least three of them that I know of who are free for families and professionals to reach out and ask for resources. And they'll do some connections and stuff. So, but on their website, they have a resource directory, and you can click on the state that you live in the United States, and it will list there who they've been told the diagnostic clinics are. So it's not saying they're not promoting one over another. It's just, and those kind of resource directories are always hard to keep up to date. But for the
Yeah.
most part, it should list where the diagnostic clinics are in that state. I do not recommend to anybody for diagnostics for this your general neuropsychologist or your general kind of doctor who doesn't have specific training in FASD is going to miss this. And that's why families are sitting there for 6 or 10 or 40 years even and this diagnosis is missed all the time and misdiagnosed. Like you said, autism is a common misdiagnosis, ADHD, bipolar, oppositional defiant disorder. The list goes on and on. Within adoptive foster families, RAD, reactive attachment disorder, is a very common misdiagnosis. And so you do really have to find somebody that specializes in this for the diagnostics.
Okay, that's really difficult. Some
Hmm.
places have it right on their
Yep.
website. You can go to,
Yep.
it'll say FASD Diagnostic Clinic. I've been searching, I won't get into too many specifics, but I've
Yep.
contacted numerous in our state healthcare and
Hmm.
hospitals that treat of right, and they don't even know what I'm talking about. They don't know where to refer me within their
Yes.
organization, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's even harder for adult diagnostics. I
Yeah,
myself was diagnosed a year ago with FASD as well. This came after I had written the book and stuff like that. So I talked in there about my own exposure and how I think it impacted me, but I did go in for the diagnostics. So yeah, your general people, and even when I brought my diagnostic eval to my primary care provider and was like, yeah, can you put this in too? And they were just like, what? And they it was just this awkward
right.
moment where, and I'm probably going to be switching because I haven't been super impressed, but this person had no idea what, and it's such a stigmatized thing too.
Well, yeah,
It,
let's talk
yeah,
about the stigma. I was trained in a way, and I'm really comfortable, Barb, with in an interview saying, "Hey, is alcohol or drugs an issue in this
yeah,
family?"
oh, yeah.
But I know so many counselors and therapists who can ask a ton of different questions,
Mhm.
but that one sticks in your
Yes.
throat. And
Mhm.
so therefore you get either not the truth or it's not
Yes.
asked.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. It is a shame-filled question, right? Even if your finger isn't pointing, it feels like your finger's pointing when you ask a person if they used alcohol while they were pregnant, right? That's just a stigmatized. So what I recommend and what most of us in the FASD field recommend is instead of you start with, hi, how far along were you when you knew you were pregnant? Right? And they're going to say whatever, 4 weeks, 3 months, 6 months. It's all over the place. And then you can say, is there any way before you knew you were pregnant that you could have been using alcohol? Because that's happened to so many of my friends and family. Even if you don't think that is true, by the way, it's probably true for every single person listening to this, right?
Yes.
But even so, you just say that, it just takes the finger pointing feeling away, and we're way more likely. There's a friend that I've got become good friends with here in the last year, and we bonded because of her child having behavioral stuff and issues like that. And after I met her, I'm like, I specialize in these big behaviors. There's a lot of raging. And anyways, the first time we're having lunch and stuff, and we're talking, and I'm talking a little bit about FASD. I don't know this woman super great yet. And so I'm talking about how I'm diagnosed and my daughter isn't. And then I said, do you have any idea if they're, and she already had said she didn't know she was pregnant until 5 months along. And so then I said, do you think there's any way that you could have been? And she goes, oh, I was using a ton. I was like living the party life. And I'm like, okay, so I can't diagnose, but I'm pretty sure this is probably what you're dealing with because your son sounds exactly like my daughter, and now you've just confirmed exposure. And so I'm actually going with her next month. We're going to go together to the diagnostic clinic in her state. This is somebody I've become really good friends with, and do the 2 days of appointments for her son. But yeah, so there's just a different way. And so she and I have been meeting regularly and talk, just getting to know each other. And she's a wonderful mom, right? She's awesome. She didn't do this intentionally. Now she's got that guilt and shame that she has to deal with. And I have many other people I've worked with who are also the biological families. And they've got to deal with that and with the shaming and blaming that they get from society, which there's nothing that burns me more than when people start going off on these on parents who did expose their children. I say this all the time, nobody ever does this intentionally. It's either somebody who was struggling with a substance use disorder and being pregnant isn't going to be enough to always stop that addiction, or it's somebody that had an unplanned pregnancy and then stopped using, or it's somebody who was still, there are still doctors today in 2026 saying it's okay to drink during pregnancy.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're still saying it. They're saying we got to stop guilting these people. It's okay to have a glass a day, and it is not. The research they look at is very faulty.
And people telling them just don't drink for breakfast, right? So
Yeah.
therapists are good at the guilt and shame, so they can work with the mom. But
Yeah.
once the diagnosis is there for the individual, I would imagine that if it's misdiagnosed, sometimes the child or the teen or the adult is medicated.
Mhm.
And those, what works as far as other than behavioral and
Yeah.
emotional, as you talked about before,
Yep.
support?
Yeah. Medications can help. It's not for all of our kids aren't going to need that, but it can help. And there is an FASD medication algorithm that can be really helpful that the majority of medication prescribers are not aware of. And you can just Google FASD medication algorithm and you can get to that easily and share that with a provider. But as the hard thing is, as far as therapeutic interventions, the majority of our therapeutic interventions, you have to have strong executive functioning skills for those to work. And the areas that you need cause and effect, logic, all of these being able to organize, plan, sequence, all you look at the 12-step process, that's a huge, that could be a whole nother podcast you could have is addiction treatment for individuals with FASD, because they are often the ones that are burning through, going through 10, 12 different treatments because
Sure.
it just doesn't work for them. And I've had many of them tell me about that. But yeah, so it's the whole thing that gets really complicated. I just totally lost my track of where I was going with that too.
I was asking about therapeutic
Oh,
intervention.
yes, the therapeutic. So there's a lot of reasons why a lot of the typical therapies like DBT and CBT and even ABA, I am not a fan of ABA therapy, which is all the rage within the autism community. But I have seen it actually harm many of our
Hmm.
kids and their families because there's a lot of shaming and guilting that many families I've dealt with that are dealing with that. So by far, the most effective intervention with FASD is working with the family and the adults around that kid or that person's life for us to change things and to make their environment differently, for us to do the right accommodations and modifications, whether it's in school, at home, in community programs. That is going to be way more effective and actually allow their anxiety to decrease, which actually allows their brain to develop more. And but also from a therapeutic kind of intervention, occupational therapy with the sensory processing focus is the most effective intervention I've seen.
You just mentioned surrounding yourself. Over the years, I've taken a number of people to Al-Anon meetings, and when they
Hmm.
go, there's one of two reactions, which is like, "These people know everything about me. Why'd you tell
Hmm.
them?" And or, "Oh my gosh, where have you all been?"
Yeah.
So there has to
Yeah.
feel good to be around people who get it.
Oh, yeah, I can't. It is life changing. It really is. I just flew back from Minnesota on 2 days ago on Sunday. I was at the Proof Alliance FASD Caregiver Conference, and I actually shared a house, an Airbnb, with 11 moms from 4 different countries. And
Wow.
I think then there we were also from like 7 different states. It was people from all, and we had 14 other people from that coaching program, the FASD Success Caregiver Kickstart, that were at it. So there was over 25 of us at this conference. And it was just like there was tears, there was laughter. This group of moms that were sharing a house, we just had a blast just being together. And most of them had never met in person. We hadn't ever
Mhm.
met in person. I had met a few of them on my travels when I trained, but as a whole, they hadn't. And it was just one of the most powerful weeks. And hopefully, some of their spouses aren't listening, but they're saying this is the best vacation they've ever had.
That's what I was thinking, actually.
It was powerful. And it doesn't always have, even just that community for the last couple of years being connected online is even online connections with other caregivers who are living the same challenging, yet rewarding, yet hard, yet good life. There's huge power in that. Finding your people is one of the most important things. And I'll tell you, when we were in this journey in the thick of it, I'm trying to find professionals. I am doing all the searches, Googling, I'm asking, I'm trying to find a different doctor or therapist who's going to help. And it really wasn't until I got connected with the caregiver community. So we lived in Minnesota until 4 years ago. We moved to Florida, my husband and I. But when I got connected with that caregiver community in Minnesota and even nationally, that's when I really started to be a more effective parent. And
Mm.
that's when our daughter started to do better because I learned from other caregivers who were in different stages on the journey than I was. That's who I started to learn from. And so, yeah, getting connected. There's Facebook support groups. So Jeff Noble is the owner and developer of that Caregiver Kickstart program, and he's got a huge Facebook group. I think it's just called Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorders Caregiver Support Group on Facebook. There's over 8,000 people in it from, I can't even, at least 20 countries, at least. Wait, probably more than that.
You
But
know,
there's a lot of other Facebook support group pages. Proof Alliance has their virtual family center,
mhm.
which is open to anybody from anywhere. But even just getting connected in your local area with some support group networks. And you know what? If you have to be the one to start it up, I actually had to start one up in Minnesota back in the day with Proof Alliance. I'm like, look, can I do a support group? That's how I started to work there. I worked there many years ago. And so, but getting connected, even virtually, if you can't find people in your local area.
I think I know the answer to this last question just because of how you come across, but you sound so optimistic. Are you hopeful? We seem to be at the infancy of this, but are you hopeful? And does it seem like the understanding is growing?
I am hopeful. You know, FASD United, which is our national organ in the United States on FASD, they've been doing some really great work in the last 5 or so years. They've done great work forever, but they've really stepped it up in the last 5 or so years. And they and a whole group of people from around the United States were able to get an FASD Respect Act passed
Yes.
federally. And actually, right now, if the by before May 22nd, they're trying to get people to send some testimonial things to Congress or to the Senate to try to get the right funding for it. So we got the bill passed, and now they have to appropriate funding. So anyways, it seems like we're finally starting to be heard a little bit more. Honestly, 5, 10 years ago, we were like sitting there like, is anybody
Mm,
listening? We're like, this is 1 out of 20 kids, everybody. Autism's 1 out of 31.
yeah.
If this is diagnosed properly, it's 1 out of 20, and they actually think it's more common than that. And in particular, with how alcohol use went up at the beginning of the pandemic. The pandemic babies are in kindergarten this year, y'all. And so right now, currently, the CDC reports that 1 out of 7 pregnancies are alcohol exposed.
Wow.
So this
Amazing.
is huge. So yeah, so we feel like we're finally kind of starting to but we need more people. We need more families, more politicians, more medical providers, mental health providers to understand and get the right training on this. It's so crucial because when we do start to see that, we start to see better supports. And then we can have more prevention. That's,
Right.
obviously the biggest key is to prevent kids from being exposed prenatally, but we're never going to be able to prevent it 100%. You can't because there's unplanned pregnancies that
No, and
lead
I
to.
guess the good news with that, I said it was last question, maybe not, is the drinking in this current younger generation is significantly down. So maybe there's a positive outcome somewhere along the line.
Yes, that is a great thing. The one challenge we have is cannabis use is on the increase
Yes,
big
right.
time, and that also has a negative impact. The other drug exposures can also have negative impacts. It's not as severe as the alcohol, but opioids, cannabis, any of the other drugs are going to have negative impacts as well. But when we see a lot of times we're seeing kids being exposed to both. But yeah, there is hope. The other thing too is even I even look at my daughter who's 26 now, and she's really starting to do better. As some of these things in her brain are starting to connect and grow. She's gone 4.5 years with no physical aggression, which is huge for her because she has a huge history of that. She's just starting to do better, but it's because we all backed off and put the right supports around her. And that is allowing her anxiety to not get too extreme. So we're starting to see those connections because we see developmentally scattered profiles with this population. And so if we can keep them safe and out of trouble in those emerging adult years, we can start to see a lot of these individuals thrive and do really well.
Great. Barb, thank you not just for your time, but for your insight and your inspiration and your hard work for crying out loud. Really appreciate it. Those of you who listen and watch, you know that there are links to all of Barb's stuff. Last week we did a thing with Proof Alliance. There's links to there. So if you want to know more about this, or if you're a therapist and want to bring the training, there's no better person to do it. We hope that you can find support and courage wherever you are. As always, thanks for listening, watching. Be safe, be well, and be educated.